The private security director's words hit me with the kinetic force of a catastrophic market crash. Sir, I verify the husband's biometric clearance every single day. There he is exiting the VIP elevator right now. I am Grant Sterling, and I have been legally bound to Sloan for 8 years. At least, I thought I was married to her. Standing in the imported Italian marble lobby of Apex Wealth Management in downtown Denver, watching my wife's flawlessly sculpted face drain of color as some tall, athletic stranger walked toward us with the confident smirk of a trust fund heir, I realized my entire high society existence had been a carefully constructed fraud. "Hey, babe," the stranger said to Sloan, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Who is this?" Sloane's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The security director, a former military contractor with sharp eyes, looked between us with growing confusion. I could practically see the threat assessment gears turning in his head as he tried to process the liability of what was happening. "I am sorry," I said, my voice projecting a surprisingly cold, calculating calm. "There seems to be a structural misunderstanding. I am Grant Sterling, Sloane's husband." The stranger, tall, impeccably groomed, wearing a bespoke suit that easily eclipsed my annual country club dues, laughed. Actually laughed. "That is an amusing pitch, man. I am Preston Blake, Sloane's husband. We have been married for 3 years. The elite lobby fell dead silent except for the ambient jazz piping through the hidden acoustic speakers. Other managing directors had started to notice the friction, gathering in small circles and exchanging whispered intelligence. I caught sight of Harper Quinn, Sloane's closest confidant from the executive suite, standing near the private elevator bank with her manicured hand covering her mouth in pure shock. "Sloan," I said with surgical precision, "what exactly is the dynamic here?" My wife, or the corporate sociopath I thought was my wife, finally found her vocal cords. "Grant, I can rationalize this." "No need to rationalize anything to this unstable hostile," Preston interrupted, and stepping into my physical space. "Security, please physically escort this man off the premises. He is obviously a deranged stalker." That was the exact millisecond something inside my architecture snapped, not into a blind emotional rage, into something infinitely more lethal, absolute tactical clarity. 8 years of navigating high society galas, building a massive shared asset portfolio, and I had been nothing more than an unwitting shell company for her affection. The endless late nights reviewing contracts at the Denver office, the supposed offshore acquisition trips, the gradual emotional divestment. It all made perfect sense on the balance sheet now. "You know what?" I said, executing a step back toward the private elevator where Harper stood frozen. "You are completely correct. I do not know Sloane's true identity at all. In fact, I am only on site to meet my fiancée, Harper Quinn." Harper's eyes widened to the size of silver dollars, but she possessed the rapid processing speed of a seasoned executive. "Grant, there you are, darling. I was wondering when you would clear security." She hooked her arm through mine and pulled me into the mahogany-paneled elevator just as the polished steel doors were sealing shut. Through the rapidly narrowing gap, I saw Sloane's immaculate mask shatter into a contortion of fury and absolute panic. "He is my legally contracted husband," Sloane screamed loud enough for half the Wall Street recruits in the building to document. "He is my actual husband." The heavy doors locked on her desperate broadcast, and Harper and I rode up to the executive levels in a stunned, pressurized silence. "Jesus Christ, Grant." Harper whispered, her composure cracking. "How long have you had the intel?" "About 30 seconds longer than you have," I replied, methodically adjusting the knot of my silk tie. My hands were registering a slight adrenaline tremor, but my analytical mind was rendering in crystal clear high definition. "How long has this merger been operational?" Harper bit her lip, visibly calculating the risk-to-reward ratio of corporate loyalty to Sloane versus basic human ethics. "I operated under the assumption you were fully briefed. I thought you two maintained some sort of elite open border arrangement. She leverages Preston's name constantly, brings him to the exclusive charity galas, introduces him as her primary partner to our highest net worth clients." The elevator chimed a soft acoustic note as we breached the penthouse floor. The doors glided open to reveal Apex Wealth Management's inner sanctum, all frosted glass partitions, hyper-modern architectural layouts, and the intoxicating hum of unlimited financial success. This was Sloane's territory, the empire where she had constructed an entirely separate power dynamic without my signature. How long, Harper? She exhaled a ragged breath. 3 years, maybe longer. Grant, I am profoundly sorry. I legitimately thought 3 years, I repeated. 3 years of forged ledgers, 3 years of returning to a luxury Cherry Creek estate to a woman who is running a shadow corporation during market hours, and the entire board here accepts Preston as her legal spouse, every single one of them. The CEO officially introduced them at the corporate winter gala as our apex golden couple. Preston is the director of strategic acquisitions. They collaborate constantly, chartering private flights together for international business. Harper trailed off, seeing the absolute zero temperature in my eyes. I walked over to the reinforced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Denver skyline. Somewhere on the ground floor, Sloan was likely executing a catastrophic public meltdown in the lobby. The visual should have provided me with a baseline satisfaction, but instead I felt a dangerous predatory calm settling over my nervous system. Harper, I require a non-disclosure favor. Anything. Do not brief Sloan that we held this debriefing. As far as her data suggests, you extracted me because you evaluated me as a random hostile threat, and you were mitigating a corporate PR disaster. She nodded with slow, deliberate comprehension. What is your strategy going to be? I turned back to her, projecting a terrifyingly reassuring smile. I am going to forensically audit exactly who I have been legally bound to for 8 years, and then I am going to determine how to liquidate her. The elevator chimed again, and Sloan erupted from the cab, her designer makeup flushed and her signature blowout severely compromised. Behind her, Preston followed with the entitled aggressive posture of an heir who had never been told no in his entire existence. Harper, put distance between yourself and that individual, Sloan commanded, her vocal register tight with suppressed hysteria. This man is a volatile threat. He has been obsessively stalking my movements. I had to respect her crisis management skills. In the span of 5 minutes, she had pivoted from exposed silence to fabricating a complete defensive narrative designed to firewall her secret life. It was a masterclass in sociopathy. Actually, I countered, extracting my encrypted smartphone from my jacket. I assessed there might be a severe failure of intelligence here. I bypassed my security protocols and scrolled through my encrypted cloud archives until I located the target file, our high society wedding spread from 8 years ago. Sloan draped in a custom Vera Wang gown, me wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, both of us projecting the image of flawless elite power outside the Aspen Country Club. I elevated the screen for the entire executive floor to audit. This is Sloan and me on our wedding day, August 15th, 2016. We have been legally married for 8 years, claiming primary residence at our Cherry Creek luxury estate. Our anniversary is next month, actually, and I was orchestrating a surprise tasting menu at Tavernetta, that sleek rooftop lounge where we initiated our first date after meeting at Little Owl Coffee. The silence that blanketed the executive floor was absolute. Several senior partners and wealth managers had converged, magnetized by the impending corporate slaughter. I could see devices being activated, undoubtedly capturing what was instantly shaping up to be the most catastrophic office scandal in Denver's financial history. Preston's arrogant smirk had been fully erased, replaced by a visceral, ugly realization. You are fabricating this. Sloan would have disclosed if she was bound to another portfolio. Would she? I countered, projecting genuine academic curiosity. Because considering she completely omitted her legal marriage to you, it forces me to run a risk assessment on what other massive liabilities she has been hiding off book. Sloan finally rebooted her vocal processing. Grant, I am begging you, can we take this into arbitration privately? I assess we have breached the threshold of private arbitration, do not you? I swept my gaze across the assembled gallery of executives. Besides, my due diligence is uncovering so much about my wife's capabilities today. For instance, I had zero data indicating she was such a flawless corporate actor. That was the exact moment Preston executed his first catastrophic tactical error. He closed the distance, violating my physical perimeter in that aggressive posturing manner that entitled trust fund bullies deploy when they assume they hold the leverage. Listen to me, buddy. I do not know what kind of extortion game you're running, but Sloan is my wife. We share a massive lifestyle. You need to abort this operation before it gets physically ugly. I tilted my head, analyzing him. He had at least 4 inches of vertical advantage on me and smiled. Gets ugly? Preston, my friend, we blew past ugly about 10 minutes ago in the lobby. Right now, we are currently residing in the zip code of total legal and financial ruin. The clinical, emotionless delivery seemed to short-circuit his processor. Perhaps he had modeled that I would be intimidated, that I would fold like some weak-willed husband in a daytime drama. Instead, I was operating at peak efficiency, enjoying the absolute dominance of the moment. Do you want to know the most highly amusing variable in this equation? I continued, broadcasting to the growing audience of partners as much as to Preston. I drove down here to surprise my wife with an artisanal espresso and lunch. I was going to escort her to that boutique bistro she frequents, maybe walk through the botanical gardens afterward to discuss our quarterly goals. Very romantic, very high-value husband protocol. I paused, letting the silence maximize the impact. Instead, I conduct an on-site audit and discover my wife has been running a shadow life for 3 entire fiscal years. That's not just a breach of marital contract, ladies and gentlemen. That is a masterclass in sociopathic fraud. Sloan was producing tears now, but they were entirely devoid of genuine remorse. They were the tears of a trapped predator realizing her carefully curated, high net worth empire was being systematically dismantled in real time in front of her board of directors, and she lacked the capital to stop it. "Grant, please," she whispered, her voice breaking perfectly. "Can we just return to the estate and negotiate this?" "The estate?" I laughed, a sharp metallic sound that surprised even me with its absolute zero warmth. "Which estate, Sloan? The Cherry Creek property where you hold a marriage certificate with me, or the Four Seasons penthouse where you play wife to Preston? Because my current risk model suggests I do not know your true identity at all." That was when Harper stepped into the crossfire, displaying genuine tactical courage. "Perhaps we should all de-escalate and take a step back into a conference room. And no," I commanded with absolute authority, "I assess we need to take several aggressive steps forward. Sloan, I require data, and I think your corporate board deserves full transparency too. After all, they are the ones who have been subsidizing the real you for the past 3 years. Preston's face was registering a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are a psychotic threat." Security. But the security director from the ground floor had ridden the secondary elevator up, and he was currently analyzing Preston with a highly critical, suspicious glare. "Mr. Blake, I assess that we need to involve the Denver Police Department and let their detectives sort out this liability. An impeccable strategy." I agreed, extracting my smartphone once more. "I am confident the authorities will be highly motivated to review our certified marriage license and our joint offshore financial accounts and our multi-million-dollar mortgage documents and our joint federal tax filings." Every single asset class I listed struck Sloan with the impact of a physical concussive blast. Because naturally, all of those binding legal documents existed. We had engineered an elite portfolio together, even if 50% of that equity was built on a shadow ledger. The elevator chimed once more, and this time it delivered what appeared to be the apex of the executive hierarchy, including a woman in an immaculate razor-sharp designer suit who radiated the unmistakable, chilling authority of a Fortune 500 CEO. "What exactly is the nature of this operational disruption?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the chaotic atmosphere like a surgical laser. Sloan immediately straightened her posture, desperately attempting to project a facade of executive control. "Ms. DuPont, there has been a catastrophic misunderstanding. This individual is her legally contracted husband," I intercepted, extending my hand to Ms. DuPont with professional calm. "Grant Sterling, managing partner at Sterling Capital. And you are Eleanor DuPont, Chief Executive Officer." She accepted my handshake, her eyes running a rapid calculating scan of my demeanor. "And you are entering onto the record that you are married to Sloan Sterling for 8 fiscal years, although my recent audit indicates she has also been simultaneously married to your Director of Strategic Acquisitions for the past 36 months. So my current assessment is that she is simply aggressively diversifying her marital portfolio." A few junior partners in the gallery actually emitted shocked laughter, which seemed to push Preston closer to a total system failure. "This is absolute defamation," he sputtered, his entitlement flaring. Sloan, brief them. Brief them regarding our destination wedding in St. Bart's, about our luxury penthouse, about our long-term acquisitions. Acquisitions, I inquired, projecting genuine analytical interest. What specific type of acquisitions? Because Sloan and I were modeling the financial projections to start trying for heirs in the next quarter. Were you simultaneously projecting to start trying for heirs too, Preston? Because from a legal standpoint, that could trigger a massive custody liability. Sloan emitted a sound that was caught somewhere between a suppressed sob and a primal scream. Terminate this. Just terminate this operation right now. But my forensic audit was only just initializing. 8 years of an elite partnership. 8 years of believing I had secured a peer. 8 years of scaling an empire with a woman who had been executing a completely parallel existence. The data breach was total now, and I realized my momentum was mathematically impossible to stop. Ms. DuPont, I need to consult you on a compliance issue. When Sloan charters travel for corporate acquisitions, does Preston accompany her on the manifest? The CEO's expression darkened into a mask of pure corporate liability. Routinely, yes, they are authorized to operate in the extreme tandem. I calculate they do. And these offshore deployments, are they expensed directly to Apex Wealth Management? 5-star luxury suites, Michelin-star dining, private aviation, standard executive protocol? Yes, I nodded, processing the variables. So, effectively, Apex Wealth Management has been unknowingly subsidizing my wife's shadow relationship for 36 months. That is actually a breathtakingly efficient strategy from an illicit financial planning perspective. The severe legal implications of my hypothesis began to detonate in the minds of every executive present. If Sloan and Preston had been exploiting corporate capital to finance their domestic partnership while filing it under corporate acquisition expenses, that was no longer just an HR violation regarding infidelity. It was systemic federal wire fraud. Preston's processor finally seemed to catch up to the legal reality because his aggressive chest-puffing posture instantly collapsed. Now hold your position a minute. Every single offshore deployment was a legitimate corporate mission. Every expense report was vetted and justified. I'm absolutely certain they were. I countered with a soothing, lethal calm. I am confident there were endless, highly legitimate corporate strategies that required you and my wife to occupy the same luxury penthouse suites in offshore tax havens. Highly professional. Entirely compliant, Ms. DuPont was currently analyzing Sloan and Preston with the terrifying blank expression of a CEO calculating exactly how many millions this scandal was going to bleed from the firm in SEC fines and reputational slaughter. Sloan, she ordered, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, I assess that you and Preston need to relocate to my boardroom immediately. But Sloan lacked the tactical sense to surrender. Ms. DuPont, this individual is clearly a volatile sociopath. He has been financially and emotionally terrorizing me for fiscal quarters. I have been paralyzed with fear to file a report, and because you have been legally married to him for 8 years, Harper intercepted with a sniper's precision. The entire gallery swiveled to focus on her, and she offered a cold shrug. My apologies, but I have audited Sloan's conversations regarding her husband Grant on multiple occasions. She merely omitted the critical data point that Grant was not Preston. The glare Sloan directed at Harper contained enough venom to melt a server rack. You lack the clearance to understand this dynamic. Negative. I assess that I understand the architecture flawlessly, Harper fired back. You have been operating a shadow corporation, and now your ledger is exposed. The only variable left is how you intend to mitigate the bankruptcy. That was the exact moment I processed a highly critical data point. I was not the only entity who had been defrauded. Harper, the executive board, even Ms. DuPont. They had all been fed manipulated data streams as well. Sloan had not just breached my contract. She had defrauded every single high net worth individual who assumed they held a position of trust with her. You know what the optimal play is? I stated, broadcasting to the paralyzed gallery of executives. I calculate that I have extracted all the necessary intelligence for today. Sloan, my legal counsel will be serving the divorce filings to this office at the opening bell on Monday. Preston, I wish you optimal luck with surviving whatever SEC audit this triggers. I pivoted and executed a controlled walk toward the elevator, then paused and recalibrated my stance, looking back. Oh, for the record, Sloan, I purged your biometric access to the Cherry Creek estate this morning. Your designer luggage is currently occupying the front portico. I advise you to secure your assets before the Denver climate ruins the leather. The final visual I processed before the elevator doors sealed shut was Sloane's flawlessly sculpted face, a twisted mask of absolute rage and catastrophic disbelief. She had modeled that I would be emotionally destroyed, to grovel, to attempt a hostile takeover to win her back. Instead, I was executing a clean extraction with my elite reputation immaculate and her corporate empire rapidly accelerating toward bankruptcy. As the elevator descended to the lobby, I bypassed my lock screen and dialed my premier contact, Declan Vance, who operated an exclusive high-stakes lounge called the Obsidian Room. Declan, it is Grant. Clear your VIP schedule for this evening. I have acquired a massive data breach to debrief, and I am going to require an extensive volume of your reserve, McCollin. The Obsidian Room operated exactly as its brand identity promised. Dark imported mahogany, low ambient lighting, and the precise type of ultra-discreet atmosphere that facilitated ruthless corporate honesty and highly questionable off-book decisions. Declan Vance had managed the operation for 15 years, and in that tenure, his private booths had served as the unofficial confessionals for half of Denver's power brokers. So let me run this algorithm straight, Declan verified, pouring a third measure of amber liquid into my crystal glass. Your wife has been simultaneously legally married to two high-net-worth individuals for 3 years, and your audit only triggered because a security director misidentified your biometric profile for the shadow husband. That is the executive summary. Affirmative. Declan exhaled a low, impressed whistle. That is elite cartel-level deception right there. The average executive can barely manage one high-maintenance partnership, and Sloan has been effectively running two parallel high-society empires. I took a measured pull of the scotch, letting the premium burn establish a perimeter in my chest. The anomaly that truly haunts my processor is how flawlessly she executed the fraud. I never registered a single red flag. Certainly she operated late hours, deployed for offshore acquisitions, but she has always been a ruthless climber. I assessed I was merely supporting her trajectory. What is your counteroffensive? That was the multi-million-dollar question sitting on the ledger. 6 hours prior, I had been an integrated high society husband orchestrating a boutique lunch date with my partner. Currently, I was occupying a VIP booth, running mental algorithms on how to surgically sever 8 years of commingled high-value assets from 3 years of a sociopath's elaborate fabrications. I am going to execute a total forensic deep dive, I stated with absolute finality. I intend to map every single coordinate of who Sloan Sterling actually is, and I am going to extract exactly what other liabilities she has buried off book. Declan arched a skeptical eyebrow. That rhetoric indicates you are architecting something highly punitive. I am architecting a strategy to guarantee she does not survive this audit. Grant, execute with extreme caution. Revenge is a dish best served at absolute zero, but it can also trigger a massive legal countersuit if you miscalculate your leverage. I allowed a dark chuckle to escape. Did you just attempt a culinary metaphor regarding corporate annihilation? I am a high-end purveyor of spirits. All my tactical wisdom is packaged in metaphors regarding premium consumption. My encrypted smartphone vibrated with an incoming text packet. Sloan, we need to enter negotiations. This entire event is a structural misunderstanding. I rotated the screen to display the transmission to Declan, who scoffed. A structural misunderstanding? What exact data point did she misunderstand? The sequence where she signed binding contracts with two separate elite targets? Incoming secondary transmission. I am devoted to you, Grant. I can provide the context for all of this. Then a tertiary ping. Please do not execute any rash liquidations. We can restructure this arrangement. And a final packet. I am secured in a suite at the Four Seasons tonight. Establish contact when you are prepared to receive my brief. She is experiencing total system panic. I diagnosed. Optimal. Declan leaned across the polished mahogany. What is your immediate tactical move? I am going to deploy my core competency. I am going to run an investigation. It is critical to note that I operate as an elite corporate investigator, not the gritty, neon-lit cliche you consume in media, but an apex predator in the financial sector. The exact type of operative who spends his billable hours unspooling offshore shell companies, tracking down hidden crypto wallets, and executing hostile audits for Fortune 500 boards. The profound irony of my current domestic situation was glaringly apparent. You are going to run a hostile audit on your own wife, my rapidly depreciating soon-to-be ex-wife, and affirmative, I am. I intend to map every data point regarding her merger with Preston. I want the timeline of their initial contact, the duration of the operational phase, and a precise ledger of what they have been embezzling from the firm's capital. I want to know if there are secondary shadow partners. That specific variable had not populated in my initial risk model, but now that it was on the board, it registered as entirely probable. If Sloan possessed the bandwidth to sustain 2 complete high society lives for 36 months, what metrics proved there were not additional entities in her portfolio? My secure line vibrated. Harper, Grant, is your status secure? I'm operating at peak efficiency, Harper. What is Sloan's current status? She is in total system failure. She has been hyperventilating for hours. She is demanding an audience to feed you her narrative. I assess that is her primary objective. What is her specific spin? There was a sustained heavy silence on the line. She claims the architecture is complicated, that your processor would not comprehend the immense pressure she has been mitigating at the firm, the executive expectations. She claims Preston was merely deployed as an emotional support asset. Emotional support that required a lavish destination wedding and the signing of a luxury penthouse lease. She claims the wedding was purely theatrical. It was executed strictly for the corporate optics to appease the board. I let out a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. Harper, permit me to run a query. In the 36 months you have monitored Sloan and Preston's dynamic, have you ever registered a single data point that indicated their legal union was a staged corporate asset? Another heavy calculating pause. Negative. They operate identical to any other ultra-wealthy married partnership. They display coordinated photography in their corner offices. They sport matching platinum bands. They strategize their long-term offshore investments together. Correct. Therefore, either Sloan is feeding you manipulated data right now, or she has been executing a massive fraud on the entire executive board for 3 fiscal years. Either way, she is a sociopathic liability. Grant, I evaluate that you should permit her to pitch her defense. Perhaps there are mitigating factors that Harper, I value that you are attempting crisis management, but I require you to download this reality. I have zero interest in the psychological justification for Sloan's actions. I do not care about the corporate pressure or the executive expectations or whatever fabricated defense strategy she has compiled. She executed a calculated daily choice to defraud my life for 3 years. That is not a structural error or miscommunication. That is a premeditated, sustained campaign of absolute betrayal. What is your endgame? I am going to ensure she absorbs the absolute maximum legal and financial penalty for her choices. After I terminated the connection, Declan poured himself a conservative measure. In the entire timeline of our association, I have never observed you operating in this specific mode. Define the mode. Cold, hypercalculating, utterly lethal. Standard protocol when an individual discovers a massive betrayal is either a complete emotional collapse or a kinetic explosion of rage. You are exhibiting neither symptom. His assessment was accurate. My standard emotional model dictated I should be shattered. I should be operating in the red. Instead, I felt a terrifying detached clarity, as if I were running a forensic audit on a stranger's bankrupt corporation. Perhaps I am experiencing systemic shock. Perhaps your optics are finally rendering Sloan without the filters for the first time. That observation struck much closer to the core architecture than I cared to log. How many systemic anomalies had I ignored? How many fabricated ledgers had I rubber-stamped without a secondary audit? My device vibrated with an incoming call from an unlisted origin. Grant, this is Preston Blake. We need to open a channel. I activated the speaker protocol so Declan could monitor the feed. I am receiving you, Preston. Look, I evaluate there has been a catastrophic data failure today. Sloan and our partnership is not what the optics suggest. Really? What exactly are the optics, Preston? I recognized the current visual, but Sloan briefed me that she was legally divorced. She presented data that you two had been physically separated for fiscal years, that the legal dissolution was merely stalled in arbitration. Fascinating. So Sloan had been running a disinformation campaign on Preston too, utilizing a completely different narrative, and you authorize that intel. Why would I flag it? She does not display a platinum band at the firm. She has never mentioned your profile. And when I ran a query on her relationship history, she claimed she was actively unwinding a highly toxic merger with a financially abusive controller. I locked eyes with Declan, who was shaking his head in sheer unadulterated awe at the sociopathy. Preston, permit me to run a query. Where does Sloan claim primary residence? She holds a lease on a penthouse at the Four Seasons. We have been cohabitating for 24 months. And her prior living arrangements? She stated she was occupying a guest suite with high society contacts while the asset division was being finalized. So Sloan had been successfully maintaining three completely distinct high net worth operational bases: the Cherry Creek estate with my portfolio, a luxury penthouse with Preston, and whatever shadow narrative she fed him regarding her transitional housing. Preston, I despise being the operative who delivers this intel, but Sloan and I have been seamlessly operating as husband and wife at our primary estate for the entire duration of your supposed partnership. We share a massive mortgage, joint offshore trusts, and until 800 this morning, I assessed we possessed a flawless elite marriage. There was a sustained hollow silence on the encrypted line. That data is mathematically impossible. Is it? When was the last sequence you accessed Sloan's penthouse during standard market hours? Another lag in transmission. She logs intense overtime most weekdays. She typically transitions to my coordinates on the weekends, correct? And I am highly confident she provides flawless, unassailable logic for why her signal goes dark on specific evenings, why she denies authorization for spontaneous high society galas, why her processor occasionally seems overloaded or erratic. How did you acquire that profile? Because I am an elite corporate investigator, Preston, and I recognize the architecture of a massive fraud when the data aligns. Sloan has been playing both sides of the board, and her execution has been flawless. I reject your hypothesis. You are not required to validate my data, but I highly recommend you begin auditing your own partnership with extreme prejudice, and perhaps you should run a hostile interrogation on Sloan as well. I terminated the link and pivoted to Declan. This matrix is vastly superior to my initial projections. Explain the logic. Sloan has not just been defrauding my accounts. She has been running a massive con on Preston too. She fed him the narrative that I was a hostile ex, convinced him they were building a legitimate empire, and engineered an entire fictional reality to validate their cohabitation. And the tactical advantage? The advantage is that Preston is a compromise mark too, in a specific capacity. And a compromise mark can be flipped into a hostile asset if you apply the correct psychological leverage. Declan analyzed me with a highly suspicious glare. What exactly are you architecting, Grant? I am architecting the exact catastrophic downfall that Sloan has earned, but initially I need to execute a massive data scrape. I utilize the subsequent 3 hours in the secure back room of the Obsidian Room, deploying my encrypted rig to run a deep dive forensic audit into Sloan and Preston's corporate footprint. Public SEC filings, shadow social media metadata, corporate expense ledgers, all the microscopic digital exhaust that the ultra-wealthy leak when they operate under the assumption that their firewalls are impenetrable. The intelligence I extracted was breathtaking. Sloan and Preston had been deploying together on corporate acquisition flights at least once a fiscal month for the past 36 months. Always targeting the same offshore banking hubs, always booking the same ultra-luxury resorts, always generating overlapping suite reservations. Apex Wealth Management had been blindly financing what were effectively lavish illicit honeymoons, cleverly miscategorized as critical executive summits. But the truly devastating intel surfaced when I bypassed their social media privacy protocols. Preston's shadow Instagram account was saturated with high-res documentation of him and Sloan at exclusive galas, VIP regattas, and 5-star alpine resorts. Sloan was actively tagged in a majority of the visual data, and her own private account, which I had never previously run a sweep on, broadcast the narrative of a completely alternate elite reality. Within Sloane's digital ecosystem, my profile was non-existent. There was zero photographic evidence of our union, zero text acknowledging our legal marriage, zero footprint of our shared high society life. Instead, there were hundreds of curated images featuring Preston, stretching back 3 entire years. Documentation of them at Apex Wealth galas, luxury weekend deployments, romantic Michelin-starred dinners, visual evidence that constructed a narrative of a partnership that was fiercely real and highly visible, at least within their specific corporate echelon. Examine this data, I ordered, rotating the screen to Declan to display a high-def image captured 6 months prior. Sloane and Preston at an exclusive corporate retreat, both sporting matching designer yachting gear embroidered with the logo Team Blake Sterling. They executed a hyphenated merger of their names, evidently, and processed this file. I swiped to a secondary image, the specific file sourced from Preston's feed, Sloane displaying a massive, flawless canary diamond ring, both of them projecting flawless elite smiles toward the lens. The caption logged 2 years, and climbing with my spectacular wife. Jesus, Grant. This is not an affair. This is the fabrication of a completely alternate legal identity. That was the exact moment the tactical reality crystallized in my processor. Sloane had not been cheating on my portfolio with Preston. She had been cheating on Preston's portfolio with me, and in her internal logic, in her corporate reality, in her curated digital footprint, Preston was her primary contracted husband, and I was the dark, illicit secret she kept geographically isolated in Cherry Creek. The realization should have triggered a catastrophic emotional collapse, but instead it felt profoundly, beautifully liberating. I was not losing my partner to a rival executive. I was verifying that the entity I believed was my partner had never actually possessed a pulse. Declan, I need to negotiate a favor. Name your terms. I need you to assist me in orchestrating a trap. Mrs. Kensington, who occupied the adjacent luxury estate, was a 78-year-old retired socialite possessing the ruthless investigative instincts of a seasoned intelligence director and the moral flexibility of a hostile corporate raider. When I bypassed her gate security at 0800 hours, carrying a curated box of her preferred imported pastries from the Denver Central Market, she instantly registered that an operation was underway. Grant, darling, you look like you just survived a hostile takeover. Is your portfolio secure? Actually, Mrs. Kensington, I require your unique surveillance expertise. It concerns Sloane. Her perfectly lifted eyes illuminated with predatory interest. Mrs. Kensington had never fundamentally approved of Sloane, although she possessed far too much aristocratic discipline to launch a direct verbal assault. But I had catalogued her microscopic expressions of disdain over the fiscal years, the precise tightening of her jaw when Sloane would launch her Porsche toward the financial district at dawn and return long after market close. What is the intel on Sloane? I verified yesterday that she has been operating a massive shadow life and an illicit partnership for 3 years. Mrs. Kensington's diamond-laden hand snapped to her pearls. Oh my word, Grant, I am profoundly sorry, but I must confess my algorithms predicted this exact outcome. Your algorithms predicted it? Well, there have been massive physical irregularities. I abstained from filing a report because I respect your perimeter. But what exactly? She gestured for me to breach the foyer and guided me to her state-of-the-art kitchen, which provided an unobstructed panoptic view of my estate through floor-to-ceiling smart glass. That unbearably arrogant individual has been breaching your perimeter for months, typically on weekday afternoons while you are deployed at your firm. He docks his Aston Martin in your circular drive as if he holds the deed and utilizes a programmed security code to bypass your locks. I operated under the assumption you had negotiated an open border policy. The blood in my veins flash froze. What specific individual? Tall, aggressively fit specimen, operates a high-end British motor. He and Sloane, well, they certainly demonstrate an extreme level of intimate physical comfort with one another. Preston had breached my secure perimeter, occupied my custom California King undoubtedly, utilized my rainfall shower, depleted my vintage wine cellar, occupied my primary asset while I was grinding billable hours to maintain the massive mortgage. Mrs. Kensington, I need to negotiate a secondary favor. This request is highly unorthodox, but I need you to run active surveillance on the estate today. Sloane is scheduled to extract her personal assets, and I require visual confirmation if she deploys with any hostile backup. Absolutely, darling. Any asset you require. And if you register any anomalous activity, anything that deviates from standard protocol, would you object to capturing high-resolution photographic evidence, strictly for my legal archives? Mrs. Kensington's smile was a terrifying weaponized curve. It would be my absolute privilege. I relocated to my corporate suite for the morning, which was a heavily fortified, ultra-modern space located in a high-rise overseeing the financial district. I was currently juggling 3 massive accounts, a CEO disappearance, a hostile corporate espionage defense, and a multi-million-dollar offshore trust dispute, but my processor was completely hijacked. Instead, I found myself deploying my forensic toolkit to dismantle Sloane and Preston's financial architecture with the exact same ruthless, methodical precision I reserved for annihilating corporate rivals. The data I excavated was exponentially more catastrophic than my initial assessment. Preston Blake was not merely Sloane's illicit corporate partner. He was her fully integrated financial co-conspirator, complete with a massive joint offshore checking account, shared black cards, and a multi-year lease on a Denver penthouse that bore both their legal signatures. They had engineered a flawlessly complete financial ecosystem entirely insulated from the portfolio Sloane managed with me. The penthouse specs were highly illuminating. 4,000 square feet in one of the city's most elite secure towers, commanding a monthly lease rate that would have bankrupted either of them as solo entities. But merged, leveraging their massive executive compensation packages from Apex Wealth, they could sustain the burn rate effortlessly. I breached the building's digital portal and audited the amenities: infinity pool, biometric fitness center, private rooftop helipad, 24/7 elite concierge. It was the exact class of real estate Sloane had relentlessly demanded we acquire, the exact class she mathematically modeled that our current liquidity could not support, except she possessed the liquidity. She simply refused to deploy it with my portfolio. My encrypted line vibrated. Declan, what is the status of the audit? Vastly superior to initial projections. Sloane and Preston have been running a fully operational shadow household for 36 months, complete with commingled offshore capital and a premier luxury penthouse. But the truly lethal data point is this: they have been subsidizing their burn rate with capital that was legally earmarked for our estate mortgage and joint asset maintenance. Clarify the mechanism. Sloane has been routing her massive executive bonuses directly into the offshore account she shares with Preston, and subsequently dripping just enough capital into our joint domestic ledger to satisfy her baseline 50% obligation. But she has been reporting on our joint federal tax filings that her gross compensation is exponentially lower than her actual yield. That is federal tax fraud. That is precisely what it is classified as, and the rabbit hole goes deeper. Recall those corporate acquisition deployments she has been running with Preston, the ones Apex Wealth bankrolls. They have been establishing fraudulent vendor shell companies, booking separate luxury suites, and then claiming massive corporate refunds on the unused inventory, washing the surplus capital through offshore crypto wallets. Jesus, Grant, this is not a domestic affair. It is a highly sophisticated corporate embezzlement syndicate. I am fully aware, and I am going to ensure the Department of Justice is fully briefed. At 1200 hours, Mrs. Kensington initiated a priority call. Grant, darling, you need to verify this visual immediately. Sloane just breached the perimeter with that specific man and a team of professional art handlers. They are actively transferring assets into a climate-controlled transport vehicle. Define the assets. High-value appreciating equity primarily, the imported Italian dining array, the custom living room installations, your curated modern art collection. It appears she is systematically liquidating every single asset that is not structurally welded to the foundation. I registered a massive spike of adrenaline that was instantly suppressed and converted into something infinitely more valuable: absolute tactical leverage. Mrs. Kensington, are your lenses still capturing data? Oh, affirmatively, darling. I have compiled quite an extensive digital portfolio already. Flawless. Maintain the surveillance stream. I will be on site in 20 mics. I pushed my vehicle back to Cherry Creek at speeds that severely violated local ordinances, my processor redlining with legal strategies. Sloan was executing a catastrophic procedural error, and I was going to ensure she triggered every punitive clause in our arsenal. When I breached the perimeter of my street, I acquired visual confirmation of the transport vehicle idling in my circular drive. Sloan's Porsche was docked, flanked by Preston's Aston Martin and a luxury SUV I failed to identify. Through the expansive architectural glass of my living sector, I could track the handlers operating inside my perimeter. I positioned my vehicle out of visual range and initiated a call to emergency dispatch. I need to register a high-value felony theft in progress. Sir, are you currently at the coordinates? I am holding position across the perimeter. There's a team of 4 unauthorized individuals currently inside my estate, systematically loading my high-value assets into a transport vehicle. I have zero data on how they bypass the biometric locks, but they are liquidating the property. Are you the primary deed holder? Affirmative. The estate is exclusively registered to my LLC, and I hold the master security clearance. I rotated the access codes yesterday. That statement was technically a gray area. The estate was initially registered as joint marital property, but Sloan had automatically triggered the infidelity and criminality forfeiture clauses embedded in our prenuptial agreement the second she established a shadow residence with Preston. We will deploy a tactical unit to your coordinates within 5 mics. While I held the line, I dialed my apex divorce litigator, Winston Croft, whom I had placed on a massive retainer at dawn. Winston, this is Grant Sterling. Sloan has breached the estate perimeter with Preston and a team of handlers, and they are actively stripping my high-value assets. Grant, legally that inventory is classified as marital property until the decree is finalized. She retains a right to, not if she has been maintaining a secondary household with a hostile entity for 36 months and actively defrauding the primary estate. Furthermore, she bypassed a secured perimeter. I locked her out. Did you initiate the lockout prior to or after acquiring forensic proof of the breach? After. Then she might attempt to file an injunction for access, but if she is extracting a disproportionate volume of the equity, that is a maneuver we can completely weaponize during the asset division phase. What if I provided you with verified data that she has been executing massive federal financial crimes for 3 years? Tax evasion, corporate embezzlement, offshore money laundering, and identity fraud, and the works. There was a razor-sharp silence on the line. What specific forensic evidence have you compiled? Encrypted bank ledgers, shadow social media metadata, corporate shell company filings, sworn surveillance affidavits. Winston, this operative has been financing a completely shadow empire utilizing capital she siphoned from our marriage and her Wall Street firm. Download every single byte of data you possess to my secure server. If your intel is verified, we can secure an immediate federal injunction and freeze her entire global portfolio. The Denver PD cruisers breached the perimeter just as Sloan and her team were securing my original Picasso sketch into the transport. 2 heavily armored officers exited the lead vehicle and advanced on the primary entrance just as I closed the distance up the driveway. Officers, I appreciate the rapid deployment. These individuals have compromised my security perimeter and are currently stripping my high-value assets. Sloan emerged through the custom mahogany doors, carrying a secure lockbox containing our premium timepieces. When her optics registered my presence flanked by law enforcement, her flawless complexion went absolutely sterile.
Grant, what is your objective here? I am officially registering a felony theft. Officers, this individual is my wife, whom I am currently in the process of legally divorcing. Yesterday, I rotated the security codes on our estate because my audit confirmed she has been cohabitating with another man for 36 months. Today, I returned to base to discover her and her accomplices executing a coordinated heist. The lead officer, a hardened sergeant radiating absolute authority, analyzed the dynamic between us. Ma'am, do you maintain primary residence at these coordinates? Affirmative. This is my estate too. We possess a marriage certificate, but you do not actually log sleep cycles here anymore, do you, Sloan? I interjected. You operate out of that massive 4 Seasons penthouse downtown with Preston. You have been running that base for 3 years. Preston selected that precise, catastrophic moment to exit the estate carrying a crate of my vintage Bordeaux.
When his optics locked onto the police cruisers, he froze. And identify yourself? the sergeant demanded. Preston Blake. I am her legally contracted husband. I provided helpful clarification. At least, that was his operating assumption until 800 yesterday. Preston, did you brief the officers on the specific method you utilized to bypass my biometric security? The sergeant's posture was shifting into active threat assessment. All right, all parties cease verbal output. Sir, she locked onto me, is this your exclusive primary residence? Affirmative, I can provide the deed, the LLC documentation, whatever verification you require. And ma'am, she rotated to Sloan, you are testifying that you maintain residence here as well? We are married. This is our joint property. But where do you actually power down at night? Where does your primary mail route? Where is your daily wardrobe inventoried? Sloane's mouth executed the mechanical motions of speech, but zero audio was produced. She sleeps at my penthouse, Preston stated quietly, his survival instincts finally overriding his arrogance. Has logged residence there for the past 24 months. The sergeant processed the data. So you do not actually maintain a legal footprint here anymore, ma'am. You reside with Mr. Blake, but I am still legally bound to Grant. I still retain equity rights to this estate, perhaps, but you absolutely lack the legal authority to bypass the security perimeter and extract assets without his explicit consent, especially considering you have established a primary luxury domicile elsewhere. That was the exact sequence where Sloan executed her most catastrophic tactical error of the day. Instead of deploying crisis de-escalation, she doubled down on her entitlement. This is an absurd abuse of power. Grant, you lack the authority to execute this maneuver. 50% of every asset in this portfolio belongs to my ledger. You are mathematically correct, Sloan. 50% of the legitimate equity was yours, but you vaporized your legal claim to it the second you relocated your base of operations to your shadow partner and initiated a massive fraud campaign. You cannot leverage both portfolios. I never permanently vacated. I have been maintaining operations here the entire timeline. I extracted my encrypted smartphone and displayed a downloaded image from Preston's shadow Instagram to the sergeant, time-stamped 3 days prior. Sloan draped in a silk robe, operating an espresso machine in what was indisputably Preston's ultramodern kitchen. The caption broadcast, "Morning protocol with my spectacular wife." Officer, this visual data was captured 72 hours ago inside Mr. Blake's downtown penthouse. Sloan is attired in sleepwear, brewing espresso, clearly exhibiting the posture of a permanent resident. Does this visual align with an individual who has been maintaining their primary base at my estate? The sergeant scrutinized the high-res file, then rotated to Sloan with a look of absolute professional disgust. Ma'am, I am issuing a direct order for you to instruct your handlers to return every single asset to the structure, and then you will vacate the perimeter. If you intend to litigate for marital equity, you execute that maneuver through a federal judge, not by orchestrating a heist on a property you do not occupy. But I possess the entry codes, not since I purged the system, I stated, displaying the new biometric logs I had installed, and the fact that you were forced to manually bypass the secondary alarm verifies that you lack authorized access. That is when Preston's processor finally grasped the sheer velocity of the threat. Sloan, I highly advise we initiate an immediate retreat. We can deploy our legal teams to untangle this later. But Sloan had completely abandoned all logical protocols. No, I'm not authorizing him to liquidate everything I've engineered. Engineered? I let out a harsh metallic laugh. Sloan, you have been actively embezzling capital from our joint portfolios to finance your luxury penthouse lease with Preston. You have been executing massive federal tax fraud by manipulating your compensation data. You have been exploiting Apex corporate resources to wash funds through fake shell companies. The only entity executing a liquidation operation here is you. The sergeant was actively logging the data into her terminal now. Sir, do you possess forensic documentation of these financial felonies? I possess 36 months of encrypted bank ledgers, federal tax filings, and corporate expense reports. I have also secured sworn affidavits and high-resolution photographic evidence of the shadow operation. Sloan suddenly processed that she had marched directly into a lethal kill box. Grant, I am begging you, can we enter a private arbitration regarding this? Negative, Sloan. We have completely bypassed the arbitration phase. You forced this into the public domain the second you initiated a shadow corporation for 3 years. The secondary officer, who had been maintaining a silent tactical overwatch, stepped into the primary zone. "Ma'am, I assess that you need to accompany us to the precinct. We have extensive interrogations to conduct regarding these allegations of multi-million-dollar fraud." "What negative? I am a senior executive. I am not deploying anywhere. I have not executed any illegal maneuvers." But her ledger was painted red, and every single operative on the ground knew it. The forensic data was insurmountable, and Sloane's arrogant, entitled posturing had exponentially magnified the severity of her situation. As the officer secured the steel cuffs onto Sloane's wrists and escorted her to the cruiser, Preston remained paralyzed in my driveway, his elite reality completely shattered. "I had zero intel," he stated quietly, his voice hollowed out. "I swear I lacked the data that she was still legally merged with your portfolio." "I verify your statement, Preston. But here is the brutal metric. Sloane ran a disinformation campaign on both of us. The critical variable is, what is your counter strategy going to be?" He ran a desperate visual scan of the transport vehicle, the high-value assets that his team was now forced to carry back into my estate, and the smoldering crater his elite life had instantly become. "I have zero protocol for this." "Well, when your legal counsel formulates a strategy, initiate contact. I evaluate we have significantly more offshore data to audit than you currently comprehend." As Preston piloted his Aston Martin off the perimeter and the transport vehicle executed a retreat, I held my position in the driveway, registering a sensation I had not logged in nearly a decade: absolute, unadulterated supremacy. Mrs. Kensington materialized at my flank. "Well, that was a spectacular tactical strike, Mrs. Kensington. You are an apex operative. Did your lenses capture the entire sequence?" She elevated her smartphone with a predatory smirk. "Every single frame, darling, including Sloane's desperate attempt to manually bypass the biometric scanner with a black card. Flawless. I project those files are going to be immensely valuable during the federal indictments." The incoming communication pinged at 0600 hours, exactly 72 hours post Sloane's highly publicized arrest. It was Winston Croft, my shark litigator, and his vocal register was projecting a level of electrical intensity I had never previously monitored. "Grant, your processor is going to reject the sheer scale of this data. The district attorney is demanding an immediate summit with you today. Regarding Sloane, Preston, and the entirety of Apex Wealth Management. It appears your wife's little shell company operation possessed a market cap vastly larger than our initial audit projected." I instantly transitioned from sleep mode to peak operational readiness, pacing my custom suite. How massive is the variance? Try $4.5 million massive. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division executed a raid after we uploaded our forensic packet, and they have been dismantling Sloane and Preston's offshore architecture for the past 3 days. Grant, they have been operating a highly sophisticated corporate embezzlement syndicate for 3 fiscal years. Christ, it escalates. Recall those international acquisition deployments they were running. They were not merely scamming corporate refunds on luxury suites. They were architecting phantom offshore consulting firms, submitting fraudulent multi-million-dollar expense ledgers, and bleeding the firm's capital for services that existed purely in the digital ether. The laundered capital was routing directly into their Cayman Island joint trust. I halted my pacing and locked my gaze out the massive windows overlooking the pristine Denver skyline. It was a flawless, razor-sharp morning, and I felt like my optics were rendering the global matrix without distortion for the first time in an era. "Winston, how does this data impact the asset division?" "It guarantees Sloane is going to face decades in federal lockup, and you are going to execute a hostile takeover of the entire portfolio. The Cherry Creek estate, the luxury fleet, the massive offshore retirement trusts, the entire ledger. She cannot legally claim a fraction of the marital assets when those assets were commingled with capital she embezzled from a federal target." "And Preston?" "Preston is actively rolling over on the syndicate to survive the DOJ audit. Apparently, he had been archiving meticulous digital ledgers of their illicit financial routing because she had manipulated him into believing they were utilizing highly aggressive but legal corporate tax loopholes. He is preparing to deliver testimony against Sloane in exchange for a highly reduced plea agreement." I allowed a cold laugh to escape. Even while orchestrating a multi-million-dollar criminal empire, Sloan had somehow selected a co-conspirator who would instantly liquidate her to save his own country club membership. What is the timeline for the DA summit? This afternoon, Grant, I need your processor to fully grasp the magnitude of this operation. This is no longer categorized as a high-asset divorce. This is a massive federal RICO indictment. Sloan is staring down the barrel of 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, and the media exposure is going to be globally catastrophic. After I terminated the connection, I initiated the espresso machine and held position in my massive kitchen, attempting to compile the sheer volume of data generated over the past week. 7 days prior, I was a fully integrated high society husband charting a boutique lunch with my partner. Currently, I was positioned as the apex forensic witness in a federal corporate fraud takedown targeting that exact same partner. My secure device vibrated with an encrypted text from an unlisted contact. This is Harper. I require a secure channel. I initiated the callback instantly. Grant, I am profoundly sorry. I lacked the security clearance to realize how deep this corruption went. Nobody possessed the clearance, Harper. That is what made Sloan such a flawless apex predator. The FBI swarmed our corporate headquarters yesterday, seizing servers and auditing 3 years of executive expense ledgers and flight logs. They have executed a total freeze on Sloan and Preston's global liquidity, and they are preparing a massive indictment against the firm itself if they can verify the board was complicit. Did you possess the intel? There was a heavy, calculated silence on the line. I registered severe anomalies. The frequency of their deployments, the excessive luxury burn rate, the offshore routing, it projected as highly aggressive, even for our tier of corporate acquisitions. But Sloan always provided unassailable financial justifications, and Preston authorized every single ledger. What is the operational morale at the firm? Total system failure, catastrophic panic. Ms. Dupont is absolutely radioactive with rage. She is mobilizing legal to execute a massive personal lawsuit against Sloan for completely incinerating the firm's global brand, and there are massive data leaks suggesting other senior executives might have been receiving cuts of the laundered capital. That was a highly valuable piece of intelligence. Specify the rumors. Julian Thorne, the VP of Global Operations, allegedly authorized the phantom vendor accounts, and Beatrice from Corporate Compliance systematically scrubbed the internal audits to mask the fraudulent wires. So it was an entire syndicate, not just Sloan and Preston. The metrics indicate it was a massive, coordinated network. The DOJ is categorizing it as one of the most brazen, sophisticated, white-collar syndicates they have dismantled in a decade. After we severed the connection, I ran the projections and realized that Sloan's liquidation was going to be exponentially more spectacular than I had engineered. This was not a localized domestic breach. It was a sprawling, systemic criminal infection that had compromised an institutional powerhouse. The summit with the district attorney was conducted in a high-security conference room that projected the absolute chilling authority of federal power. DA Rosalind Hayes was a ruthless, hyper-intelligent operative in her 50s who bypassed pleasantries entirely. Mr. Sterling, your wife and her syndicate have been operating a massive criminal enterprise for 36 months. We possess airtight forensic evidence of federal wire fraud, offshore tax evasion, corporate embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. We are authorized to grant you blanket immunity in exchange for your total forensic cooperation. I do not require immunity. I was completely firewalled from this operation. We verified your data, but we require you to comprehend the blast radius of this indictment. This trial will dominate the global financial news networks. Sloan Sterling and Preston Blake are going to be positioned as the ultimate cautionary tale of corporate greed in America. She slid a highly classified dossier across the polished mahogany. These are merely the initial federal charges we are unsealing. Run an audit. I breached the folder and felt my processor momentarily stall. 18 separate federal felony charges, including RICO violations, corporate money laundering, and organized fraud. If found guilty on all counts, Sloan was staring down a mathematical certainty of 25 years in federal lockup. There is a secondary data point. DA Hayes continued with lethal precision. We have been running active surveillance on Sloan's communications since her processing. She has been desperately attempting to route signals to you. I have not registered a single ping. That is because we have been intercepting and blocking her routing. She has been orchestrating a strategy to manipulate you into perjuring yourself, to testify that you held the master ledger and authorized her illicit activities. She executed a playback of an encrypted audio file Sloan had generated from holding. I audited my wife's vocal register, stripped of its elite polish, frantic and desperate, demanding that I verify fabricated conversations we supposedly held regarding offshore crypto investments and shadow financial planning. She is actively attempting to establish you as the mastermind of the syndicate, D.A. Hayes clarified. If you had accepted her transmission and corroborated her fabricated narrative, you would have been instantly indicted as a co-conspirator. The sheer sociopathic reality of it struck my core architecture. Even while staring into the abyss of a 25-year federal sentence, Sloan was still running manipulation algorithms, still actively attempting to incinerate my life to mitigate her own losses. What exact deliverables do you require from my firm? We require you to take the stand and provide a forensic breakdown of your marriage, Sloan's elaborate deception architecture, and the precise financial anomalies you excavated. We require your data to unequivocally prove that Sloan was the sole architect of this shadow life, and that her criminal enterprise was malicious, premeditated, and highly organized. I will deliver every single byte of data you require. That evening, I linked up with Declan at the Obsidian Room to upload the latest tactical developments. 25 years? Declan poured a massive measure. Grant, your wife is going to age out of her prime behind federal concrete, soon to be ex-wife, and that is the exact required outcome. That is absolute zero, man, even for your operating parameters. Declan, she attempted to legally frame me as the cartel boss. Even after every single asset she plundered, even after being apprehended with the stolen data, she was actively executing a strategy to send me to federal prison so she could preserve her penthouse. What is Preston's current protocol? Preston is operating as a cooperating asset. Apparently, he genuinely lacked the intellectual capacity to comprehend the RICO implications of the fraud. Sloan had brainwashed him into believing their offshore routing was perfectly legal, just highly aggressive corporate tax strategy. Do you authenticate that data? I ran the logic. Actually, I do. Preston possesses elite pedigree, but he lacks the processing power of a criminal mastermind. He is merely an entitled asset who was compromised by an operative who was vastly smarter and infinitely more sociopathic than he could ever detect. So what is the next phase of the operation? Now I hold position for the federal trial, and I liquidate her memory from my servers, but Sloan had one final desperate algorithm to run. 48 hours later, she posted a massive cash bond. Apparently, Preston's elite legacy family had leveraged their own compound as collateral before realizing she was actively destroying their son, and she immediately retained a ruthless crisis PR firm to rebrand herself as the ultimate victim. She executed an exclusive primetime interview on a major network claiming that I was a tyrannical financial controller, that I had trapped her in a gilded cage, and that her shadow merger with Preston had been her only desperate exit strategy from a highly abusive marriage. She deployed a celebrity defense litigator who held a massive press conference asserting that Sloan was being maliciously prosecuted for attempting to secure her independence, and that the federal indictments were the direct result of a vindictive, ultra-wealthy husband who had weaponized his corporate connections to destroy her. The narrative went instantly viral. Hashtag Stand With Sloan began trending globally across all social media platforms, with hundreds of thousands of users blindly validating her fabricated reality and demanding the DOJ drop the charges. For approximately 12 hours, I was positioned as the ultimate corporate villain in the global court of public opinion. Then, Mrs. Kensington launched her counteroffensive. My 78-year-old neighbor, draped in vintage Chanel and projecting the terrifying absolute authority of old money Denver, systematically vaporized Sloan's entire defense matrix on live television. I have maintained residence adjacent to the Sterling estate for 8 years, she briefed the stunned network anchor. Grant Sterling is one of the most composed, brilliant, and generous operatives in our circle. He manages our philanthropic endowments, he maintains the property impeccably, and he has never once exhibited a fraction of the tyranny Sloan is attempting to fabricate. The anchor pressed for data regarding Sloan's claims of financial abuse. Abuse? Mrs. Kensington emitted a sharp, aristocratic laugh. The only tyranny inside that estate was Sloane's absolute sociopathic narcissism. She treated her husband like a glorified portfolio manager, and then she would vanish on private jets for days at a time, bleeding massive amounts of capital for her personal vanity while leaving Grant to manage the empire. But the lethal kill shot was delivered when Mrs. Kensington authorized the network to broadcast her surveillance files. I possess 36 months of high-resolution photographic evidence documenting Sloane's paramour breaching the estate while Grant was auditing for his firm. I possess time-stamped files of them loading stolen luxury assets into their vehicles, footage of them drinking vintage champagne on the terrace while mocking their deception, and clear visual confirmation of them operating their fraudulent syndicate. The broadcast files were absolutely devastating. Sloane and Preston directing handlers to steal the Picasso, both of them projecting arrogant laughter, Sloane passionately kissing Preston on my driveway while wearing the 5-carat diamond tennis bracelet I had secured for her in Paris. Preston utilizing his unauthorized biometric code to breach my estate, carrying imported flowers and Dom Perignon. The hashtag stand with Sloane evaporated from the servers overnight, violently replaced by hashtag Sloane the Syndicate and hashtag corporate con artist. The federal trial lasted 3 weeks. I held the stand for 2 grueling days, methodically walking the federal jury through 8 years of an elite facade, 36 months of sociopathic deception, and the massive forensic architecture that had financed Sloane's shadow empire. Sloane's celebrity litigator attempted to corner me, painting me as a cold calculating mastermind who had engineered the fraud and blamed his wife. But my data was impenetrable. Encrypted bank ledgers, shadow corporate expense reports, sworn witness testimony, and hundreds of high-res surveillance files constructed an unassailable narrative of a calculated criminal enterprise. Preston took the stand for the prosecution, publicly testifying that Sloane had masterminded the entire RICO operation and manipulated his authorizations to bypass compliance. He secured 5 years of strict federal probation and massive financial penalties in exchange for his total surrender. Sloane was found guilty on 16 of the 18 federal charges. The federal judge delivered a blistering statement before sentencing her to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary and ordering the immediate forfeiture of her assets to satisfy a $4.5 million restitution order. As the federal marshal secured the heavy steel cuffs onto her wrists, Sloane rotated to lock optics with me one final time across the courtroom. I anticipated registering pure hatred or primal rage or perhaps a flicker of realization. Instead, I processed an absolute void. The entity I'd been legally bound to for 8 years stared at me with the dead blank eyes of a shark, as if the human I'd married had never actually existed. Perhaps she never had. 6 months post-sentencing, I was operating from a VIP booth at the Obsidian Room when Harper Quinn breached the perimeter. She projected a sharper, unburdened energy, radiating a new kind of formidable power, a sense of absolute clarity, perhaps, or total freedom.
Grant, I was not entirely confident you would authorize a meeting. Why would I deny authorization? You provided the critical intel that dismantled the syndicate. She slid into the leather booth across from me, and Declan deployed a flawless martini without requiring a verbal order. I tendered my resignation at Apex Wealth Management, she stated. After the DOJ finished ripping the servers apart, the brand was completely radioactive. The entire executive structure was compromised. What is your current operational status? I launched my own elite risk management firm, auditing C-suite executives for internal fraud and corporate espionage vulnerabilities. It appears there is a massive market premium for someone who knows exactly how the monsters hide their capital. I emitted a low laugh. I have zero doubt. Sloan and Preston certainly engineered a masterclass in catastrophic corporate liability. Speaking of Preston, did you track his fallout data? Negative. What is his status?
His legacy family entirely disowned him after the Fed seized their compound to cover his massive restitution. His first ex-wife, his legitimate ex-wife, successfully sued him for a decade of back alimony, and the SEC permanently blacklisted him from holding any financial licenses globally. What are his current coordinates? The last confirmed data point had him operating the floor at a volume Hyundai dealership out in Aurora. The structural irony was flawless. Preston Blake, former director of strategic acquisitions and fixture of the Denver elite, was now pushing subprime auto loans in the suburbs. His Aston Martin had been seized, his luxury penthouse liquidated, and his aristocratic brand turned to ash. What about the rest of the board? Julian and Beatrice. Julian took 2 years in a minimum security federal camp. Beatrice secured heavy probation and community service, but they are both permanently exiled from corporate America. No firm will process their applications. We held a position in the comfortable ambient luxury for a while, auditing the high net worth crowd filtering into the lounge. It was a Thursday evening and the Obsidian Room was operating at peak capacity, filled with the exact demographic Sloan had destroyed her life to impress. Grant, permit me to run a psychological query. Approved. Do you ever process any guilt regarding how thoroughly you annihilated Sloan? I mean, 15 years behind federal concrete is an eternity. I analyzed the query, running it through my core baseline. Did I feel remorse? Was there a fraction of my conscience that regretted triggering the avalanche that buried my wife in a federal cell for the next decade and a half? Negative, I stated with absolute conviction. I do not log a single ounce of regret. Truly, Harper, Sloan did not just breach our contract. She did not just feed me manipulated data. She engineered a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate built on sociopathic deception and theft. She pillaged her firm. She committed massive federal tax fraud. She actively attempted to legally frame me for her felonies. And when she was trapped, she tried to publicly incinerate my reputation to save her own penthouse. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my reserve Macallan. Sloan executed her own downfall. Every single morning for 36 months, she powered up and made the calculated choice to lie, to launder money, to manipulate every human in her blast radius. She is not wearing federal canvas because of my forensic audit. She is in a cage because of her own supreme arrogance, and 15 years is the exact mathematical penalty her crimes demanded, perhaps more. Harper nodded, the logic settling in. I suppose the math checks out. It is just jarring to reconcile the polished, brilliant Sloan I thought I knew with the ruthless operative who executed all those operations. That is because the Sloan you thought you knew was a phantom. She was a weaponized persona created to extract wealth and status from the targets around her. The real Sloan is the apex predator who embezzled $4.5 million and tried to bury her husband for it. My encrypted device vibrated with an incoming transmission. I read the notification and a genuine smile broke across my face. Profitable news? Harper inquired. The most profitable. That was my elite real estate broker. The Cherry Creek estate just closed. You are relocating coordinates? Already executed. I secured a massive ultra-modern penthouse in Lodo overlooking the mountains. No ghosts, no compromised security grids, just a flawless, clean slate. That sounds impeccable. It is. And the most satisfying detail? I utilized Sloan's forfeited half of the estate equity to purchase it in cash. So structurally speaking, she bought me my new luxury life as a penalty for incinerating my old one. We both let out a dark, satisfied laugh at the tactical justice of it was absolute perfection. Are you re-entering the market? Dating? Not currently. I'm taking some time to recalibrate my baseline without a sociopath running interference in my life, but I'm open to future acquisitions. Optimal strategy. Declan materialized at the table holding a fresh bottle of the reserve. This pour is on the house, he announced. We are officially celebrating. Celebrating what exactly? Harper asked. The irrefutable fact that the house always wins. The predators got exactly what they earned, and the operatives at this table walked away with the entire pot. I raised my crystal glass. To the final execution. To the final execution, Harper echoed. We drank, and I registered a sensation I had not experienced in an era. Complete, unadulterated supremacy. Not fleeting happiness exactly, but something structural and permanent. The absolute certainty that I had been targeted by the ultimate betrayal, and I had not just survived the strike, but turned the weapon back on the sniper. Sloane had calculated she could consume my life, and instead, she had triggered her own total obliteration. She had tried to steal my wealth, and instead, she had financed my upgrade. She had tried to cast me as the collateral damage in her ascent, and instead, she had permanently cemented herself as the tragic ruined cautionary tale of the Denver elite. As we held position in the obsidian room, surrounded by the untouchable hum of real power and success, I recognized that my ultimate prize was not the millions in retained equity, or the prime real estate, or even the flawless revenge. It was my absolute freedom. Freedom from the gaslighting, from the calculated financial drains, from the exhausting psychological warfare of loving a woman who was biologically incapable of loyalty. Freedom from the subliminal alarms warning me that something was catastrophically wrong, that I was missing a critical data point, that I was not generating enough capital for the woman I had married. Sloane was going to spend the next 15 years in a sterile federal facility analyzing the exact series of arrogant choices that had stripped her of her empire. She would have 4,000 nights to reflect on the fact that her elaborate syndicate had not only failed, but had backfired so violently she had been left with zero equity. And I was going to spend the next 15 years and every year after operating at the absolute peak of my existence, a life engineered on precision, on uncompromised reality, on the supreme luxury of operating without a parasite in the system. The final execution indeed. As the lounge began to clear and Harper prepared to extract, she turned back one last time. Grant, for whatever it is worth, I hope you secure an equal who actually deserves your caliber. I already secured one, I replied, raising my glass to her. I recovered myself. She smiled and stepped out into the crisp Denver night, leaving me in the quiet company of Declan and the flawless silence of a total victory. I finished the Macallan, settled the tab, and walked out into the freezing electric air of the city. Tomorrow the markets would open, new corporate targets would emerge, and the game would reset. But tonight, I was perfectly content to savor the absolute truth that occasionally the tactician utterly destroys the sociopath. And occasionally, the corporate predators who attempt to liquidate your existence end up orchestrating their own absolute bankruptcy instead. Sloane had demanded the entire board, 2 elite husbands, 2 parallel high society lives, unlimited offshore capital, and absolutely zero legal consequences. Instead, she had flatlined with nothing. No husband, no luxury portfolio, no wealth, and federal consequences that would suffocate her for the rest of her natural life. I had demanded just one simple asset, the unencrypted truth, and by executing that audit, I had secured the entire world. The final execution belonged exclusively to me, and the acquisition was infinitely sweeter than any victory I could have ever engineered.